The man in 14C had ordered a ginger ale with no ice. I remember that because it was the last normal thing that happened on Flight 781. I'd poured it myself, set it on a napkin with the airline's logo facing him. And he'd looked up at me with the kind of tired, polite half-smile that business travelers perfect over years of overnight routes. He was maybe 50, wire-rimmed glasses, a wedding band he kept rotating with his thumb. I'd clocked 1,000 passengers just like him across 6 years on the line. My name is Andrea Simek. I was the number 2 flight attendant on a red-eye from Dallas-Fort Worth to Seattle-Tacoma. And what I'm about to tell you is the reason that aircraft never landed at its final destination. I've told pieces of it to investigators, to therapists, to a deposition camera in a windowless federal room. But I've never told the whole thing in order, start to finish, the way it actually happened inside that tube. This is that telling. We'd pushed back from the gate at 11:47 p.m. Central, 18 minutes late because a catering cart had jammed in the aft galley rail. Crew of 6. Captain Russell Endicott, 58, 22,000 hours, the kind of man who called every flight attendant friend, and meant it. First Officer Dana Yoon, 31, sharp, quiet, recently upgraded from regional. Lead Attendant Margot Telford, who ran the cabin the way a battalion sergeant runs a column economy of motion, zero ambiguity, a clipboard in her head. 2 other attendants, Chris Kovac in the back galley, 24, brand new, still excited to fly, and Priya Nair in business class, who had 14 years and a stillness that made passengers trust her on sight. And me. Mid-cabin, row 10 through row 28, beverage service, safety compliance, the invisible rhythm of a flight that functions. We had 193 passengers, full load minus 3 empty seats, all in the last row because nobody picks the last row on a red-eye. The cabin demographic was typical for a Tuesday night westbound. Consultants heading home, a college swim team in matching warm-ups filling rows 22 through 27. A handful of families with toddlers already asleep before we leveled off. And a scattering of solo flyers with neck pillows and noise-canceling headphones who wanted to vanish for 4 hours and reappear on the other coast. I liked red-eyes. The rhythm was different. You did the service fast, then the cabin went dark, and the plane became a kind of dormitory at 35,000 feet. Your job shifted from hospitality to watching. Walking the aisle every 20 minutes, checking the lavs, listening for call chimes. The hum of the engines became a kind of silence. And in that silence you could think or not think, and both felt like a reward. We reached cruise altitude over the Texas Panhandle at 12:31 a.m. Captain Endicott turned off the seatbelt sign with a soft double chime and gave a brief, "Pia smooth ride expected," arrival around 1:50 a.m. Pacific, thanks for flying with us. Margot called the service sequence. Priya handled business. I took the mid-cabin cart. Chris took aft. I started at row 10. Coffee, water, ginger ale, tomato juice for the woman who always orders tomato juice on planes and nowhere else. The swim team wanted Sprites. The family in row 16 needed a blanket for their 3-year-old. Everything ordinary. Everything timed. Everything the way a flight is supposed to work when nobody's watching. I reached 14 degrees Celsius at approximately 12:44 a.m. That's when I served the ginger ale. No ice, napkin, half smile. He took one sip, set it in the seatback holder, and closed his eyes. I moved the cart to row 15. Behind me, I heard a sound I'd never heard on an aircraft. It wasn't a cough. It wasn't a gag. It was a wet, clicking exhale, like someone trying to breathe through a throat full of gravel. then a sharp inhalation that rattled the overhead bin panel. I turned around. The man in 14C was seizing. His ginger ale was on the ceiling, and the man in 14B was screaming. I locked the cart brake with my knee and moved back to row 14 in 2 steps. Training takes over before thought does. That's the thing civilians don't understand about crew response. We don't decide to act. The act is already loaded. 6 years of recurrent drills, medical event protocols, and the specific muscle memory of dropping to one knee beside a passenger seat had made the response autonomic. The man in 14C, I'd later learn his name was Gerald Harkin, a regional sales director from Plano, was rigid against his seatbelt. Chin up, back arched, arms locked at his sides. His eyes were open and rolled fully white. The clicking sound was coming from his jaw, which was cycling open and shut in a fast, mechanical rhythm, like a sewing machine bobbin. A thread of pinkish saliva hung from his lower lip and swung with the vibration of the fuselage. The man in 14B, whose name I never learned, had pressed himself flat against the window, both hands up, palms out, a gesture of pure animal retreat. He was saying, "Oh God, in a low, rapid loop. I reached past him and hit the flight attendant call button above 14C, which would put a chime in the forward galley for Margot. Then I keyed my handset. Margot, medical, row 14. Charlie, possible seizure. I need the AED and the medical kit. Her voice came back flat and immediate. Copy, Priya, hold business. Chris, cover mid. I'm coming back. I put my hand on Gerald Harkin's wrist to check his pulse. His skin was hot, not warm, the way a feverish person's skin is warm, but hot the way a surface is hot, as if something underneath was generating more heat than the tissue could conduct. His pulse was fast and irregular, a frantic knocking. Then it stopped. Not slowed, stopped. One moment there was a rhythm under my fingers. The next, there was nothing. His jaw stopped cycling. His body went limp against the belt. His eyes stayed open, white, and still. I looked up at 14B. Sir, I need you to move to any open seat. Now, please. He didn't need to be told twice. He unbuckled, climbed over the armrest, and was gone. Margot arrived with the kit 15 seconds later. She took one look at the man, set the AED case on the empty middle seat, and knelt across from me. Her hands were already gloved. She'd put mine on for me too before I realized she was holding them out. Pulse? Gone. Full arrest. He seized for maybe 40 seconds before. Any medical alert bracelet? I checked his wrists. Nothing. She popped the AED pads and I unbuttoned his shirt. We worked in the language of two people who've run this drill together, short words, no wasted motion. The overhead reading light casting a pale circle over his gray chest. Clear. The AED analyzed. No shock advised. That meant his heart wasn't in a rhythm the machine could correct. It meant CPR. I started compressions. Margot bagged. The cabin around us was waking up. Passengers lifting sleep masks, turning in seats, the ripple of disturbance spreading in both directions like a stone dropped in still water. Chris appeared at the edge of my peripheral vision and began managing the aisle. Calm voice. Gentle redirections, the human curtain a crew member becomes when the cabin needs to not see something. 30 compressions, 2 breaths. 30 compressions, 2 breaths. His chest felt wrong under my hands. Not the springy resistance of a living rib cage. Something denser, something that was hardening as I pressed. Margot. I feel it. His sternum. Keep going. I kept going. 60 seconds, 90, The AED reanalyzed. Still no shock advised. At the 2-minute mark, Gerald Harkin's left hand came up off the armrest and closed around my wrist. I froze. His eyes were no longer white. They were open, focused, and looking directly into mine. But the color was wrong. The sclera had darkened to a bruised amber, and the irises had contracted to pinpoints despite the dim cabin lighting. His grip tightened until the bones in my wrist ground together. He sat up against the seatbelt, and his mouth opened wider than a jaw should go, and he bit Margot Telford on the forearm. The sound Margot made was not a scream. It was a sharp, truncated bark of surprise, a single syllable expelled through locked teeth, and then she did something I will carry for the rest of my professional life. She did not pull away. She looked down at the bite, looked at me, and said, "Cart, pin him." I ripped my wrist free by twisting against his thumb, the weakest point of any grip, something I'd learned not in airline training, but in a self-defense class I took after a layover incident in Newark 4 years earlier, and threw my shoulder into the beverage cart, slamming it across the narrow aisle and into the row, pinning Gerald Harkin's legs between the cart edge and the seat frame. He didn't react to the impact. No flinch, no pain response. He reached for me again with both hands, the seatbelt cutting across his abdomen as he strained forward. And the clicking sound was back, that mechanical jaw rhythm, but faster now, wet and purposeful, as if the apparatus had found what it was designed for. Margot was on her feet, her left arm cradled against her ribs, blood running freely between her fingers. She keyed her handset with her right hand, and her voice was the same flat operational tone she'd used 30 seconds earlier. "Flight deck, Telford. We have a combative passenger, row 14, possible pharmacological event. Request door remain locked. I am initiating restraint protocol." Captain Endicott's voice came back immediately. "Copy, Margot. Do you need me to come back?" "Negative. Keep the door locked. I'll update in 60 seconds. She looked at me. "Flex cuffs are in the forward overhead kit. Go." I went. Chris had heard the call and was already pulling the restraint kit from the compartment above row 2. He handed it to me, and I saw his face white, young, the reality of the situation outrunning his training by several lengths. "What happened to him?" "I don't know. Stay on the aisle. Nobody comes past row 10. I ran back. Margot had braced herself against the seatback of row 13 and was holding Harkin at arm's length with her wounded limb, which was bleeding through the gauze she'd somehow wrapped one-handed in the 12 seconds I'd been gone. Her jaw was set. Her breathing was controlled. She was, in that moment, the most competent person I had ever seen. We cuffed his wrists to the armrests. It took both of us, and it took too long. He bit at the air between us with a relentless, undirected hunger that had no relationship to pain, threat, or fear. It was pure mechanical drive. His eyes tracked movement but showed no recognition, no negotiation, nothing behind them that could be reached with language. When the cuffs clicked, Margot stepped back and looked at her arm. The bite was deep, through the uniform fabric, through the skin, into the muscle of the lateral forearm. I could see the white flash of something that might have been fascia. The bleeding was steady and dark. "Margot, I need to dress that properly. Sit down." "Not yet." She walked 2 rows forward, leaned into the aisle, and addressed the cabin in a voice that carried without being raised. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've had a medical event with a passenger who became disoriented. The situation is contained. We ask that everyone remain seated with seatbelts fastened. The captain will update you shortly." 11 words of that were lies. The situation was not contained. She knew it. I knew it. The man in 14C was still straining against the cuffs, his wrists already abrading to raw tissue against the plastic. And he showed no sign of stopping. But the cabin settled. That's what authority does when it's convincing. It buys time. Margot sat in the jump seat at row 10 and let me open the trauma kit. As I cleaned the wound, I noticed the edges were already discolored. Not the red of fresh injury, but a yellowish brown, like a bruise that was 3 days old, compressed into 3 minutes. "That's not normal," I said. "No," she said. "It isn't." She looked at me with clear eyes. "Andrea, I need you to understand something. If I start behaving like him, you do exactly what we just did to him. No hesitation. Do you understand?" I understood. The next 11 minutes were the last period of manageable reality on Flight 781. I dressed Margot's wound with a full trauma kit irrigation, antibiotic ointment, a compression wrap tight enough to control the bleeding. Her forearm was swelling visibly, the skin taut and shiny and warm to the touch. But she was cogent, focused, and running the cabin from the jump seat with her handset clipped to her collar. She assigned Priya to take over lead duties. She told Chris to inventory every restraint device on board. She told me to check every passenger in the rows adjacent to 14 for injuries. I did. Row 13. A woman in a window seat with her jacket pulled over her head, shaking, uninjured. Row 15. 2 men, awake, pale, both fine. Row 14. The aisle seat across from Harkin. Empty. The original 14B passenger had relocated somewhere forward, and I didn't have time to track him. I reported back. Margot nodded. Then she keyed the flight deck. "Captain Telford, the passenger is restrained. He bit me during the restraint. I'm dressed and functional, but you should be aware. I'm also requesting a doctor on board call." Endicott's voice steady. "Understood. I'll make the call. How's the cabin?" "Quiet, scared, controllable." "Good. We're 94 minutes from SeaTac. I'm going to request priority handling on arrival." "Copy." She released the button and looked at me. Under the reading light, I could see a faint web of darkened veins spreading from under the bandage, tracing up her forearm toward the elbow. She saw me looking. She pulled her sleeve down. "Don't," she said. "Margot, don't time it. Don't watch it. Just watch the cabin." Captain Endicott made the PA call, a calm, practiced request for any medical professionals on board to identify themselves to a crew member. 2 people responded. A retired orthopedic surgeon in row 6 named Dr. Alan Foss, and a third-year emergency medicine resident in row 31 named Jenna Okoro. I briefed them both separately. Dr. Foss looked at Harkin from 2 rows away, watched the jaw movement for 10 seconds, and said quietly, "That's not a seizure. That's not any pharmacological reaction I've seen. That looks neurological, and I don't know what's driving it." Jenna Okoro was more direct. She examined Margot's arm, unwrapped the bandage, looked at the spreading discoloration, and said, "This is progressing faster than any infection I've ever seen. Her temperature is climbing. I'd estimate 102 and rising." She pulled me aside. "How long since the bite?" 14 minutes. The tissue change around the wound margin is presenting like a 4-day-old anaerobic infection. That's not possible. I know. Has anything like this happened on your flights before? No. Has anything like this happened anywhere? Do you have any context for this? I didn't. None of us did. This was a Tuesday night in October, and the world below us was an ordinary carpet of dark plains and distant city light, and nothing in any briefing, any news cycle, any crew room conversation had prepared a framework for what was cuffed to seat 14C. Jenna went back to Margot. I went back to the aisle. The swim team in rows 22 through 27 was fully awake now. Their coach, a lean woman with a lanyard and a calm authority that reminded me of Margot, had them quiet and seated. She caught my eye as I passed and mouthed, "How bad?" I gave her a flat palm stay put and kept walking. Chris was in the aft galley running an inventory. 4 sets of flex cuffs, 2 rolls of duct tape from the maintenance kit, extension seat belts that could be repurposed as soft restraints, a crash axe behind a sealed panel in the ceiling. He'd written it all down on a napkin in neat block letters. "Chris." He looked up. His hands were shaking, but his list was precise. "Good work. Keep that list. We might need all of it." At 12:59 a.m. Central, Gerald Harkin broke the right side flex cuff. The plastic was rated for 200 pounds of static load. He snapped it like a bread tie. The cuff failure happened while I was facing aft. I heard it a sharp, dry crack, like a pencil snapping, and turned to see Harkin's right arm free and swinging in a wide arc, fingers clawed, reaching for the headrest of the seat in front of him. The left cuff held for another 3 seconds, long enough for me to cover the distance, and then it went too. He was out of the seatbelt before I reached him. He'd pulled the release, not the fumbling, confused motion of a disoriented man, but a single direct press of the buckle, as if the motor pattern was still stored somewhere in the degrading architecture of his brain. He stood into the aisle. I want to be precise about what I saw. Gerald Harkin was not moving like a movie monster. He was moving like a man whose inhibitory systems had been removed. No hesitation between impulse and action. No pain response modulating his gait. No social filtering slowing his reactions. He was fast because nothing inside him was saying wait. He lunged toward the woman in 13A. I put myself between them. Not because I'm brave. Because the aisle was 37 inches wide and I was already in it, and there was nowhere else to be. He hit me with his full weight, maybe 190 pounds, and drove me into the beverage cart, which slammed backward into the row 15 armrests. The impact knocked the wind out of me, but the cart held, and for 1 second I had him pinned against it by his hips. His face was inches from mine. His breath was hot and smelled of copper and something chemical, something that burned the inside of my nose. His jaw was cycling. His eyes were locked on my throat. From behind me, a hand reached over my shoulder and pressed a wet cloth against Gerald Harkin's face. Dr. Foss. He'd come from row 6 carrying a lavatory towel soaked in the isopropyl alcohol from the medical kit. The fumes hit Harkin's open mouth, and he recoiled, not from pain, but from the sensory overload. He stumbled backward 1 step. Chris appeared from the aft galley with the extension seat belts. Between the 3 of us, Chris looping a belt around Harkin's right arm, Dr. Foss holding the towel as a barrier. Me pushing the cart forward as a moving wall, we drove him back into row 14 and secured him with 4 overlapping belts cinched to both armrests and the seat frame. This time, we used every attachment point we could find. It took 90 seconds. In 90 seconds, the cabin of Flight 781 went from frightened to terrified. People were standing. People were shouting. A man near the back was trying to open the overhead bin to get his bag. A woman was screaming that we needed to land immediately. A toddler in row 16 was crying in the pitch that cuts through all other sound and makes every adult in range feel the urgency in their chest. Priya materialized beside me. She didn't touch anyone. She didn't raise her voice. She walked the aisle from row 10 to row 28 with her hands visible and her face composed. And she said the same sentence to every row. "I see you. We have this. Please sit down and fasten your belt. It worked. Not perfectly, not completely, but enough. The standing passengers sat. The shouting reduced to urgent murmuring. The toddler's mother found a pacifier. The volume dropped from chaos to fear, and fear we could work with. I went to check on Margot. She was still in the jump seat at row 10. Her eyes were closed. Her skin had taken on a grayish undertone, visible even in the dim cabin light. Her breathing was shallow and rapid. The bandage on her arm was soaked through with something that was no longer entirely red, a darker fluid, brownish, with a faint iridescence. Margot. Her eyes opened. For one terrible moment, I checked the color. Brown, normal, human, still her. How long was I out? She asked. You weren't out. Your eyes were closed for maybe 2 minutes. It felt longer. She looked at her arm. It's in my elbow now. I can feel it climbing. Jenna can. Jenna can't do anything at 35,000 feet that changes what this is. You know that. I did. At 1:07 a.m. Central, we lost the second crew member. Chris had gone to the aft lavatory to check on a passenger who'd locked herself inside during the Harkin incident. He knocked, identified himself, asked if she was okay. The door opened and a 17-year-old girl in a college swim team warm-up jacket fell into his arms. Her nose was bleeding, not the slow trickle of dry cabin air, but a heavy, pulsing flow from both nostrils, dark and continuous. Her eyes were unfocused. Her skin was the same radiating heat I'd felt on Harkin. Her name, I'd learn later, was Emery Salk. She'd been in row 23, part of the swim team. And at some point during the Harkin confrontation, she'd gone to the lavatory feeling dizzy. Nobody had seen her leave. Nobody had noticed her. In row 23 had been sitting directly behind a man named Terrence Boyd, row 22D, who had boarded in Dallas, coughing, and who was now, Chris reported by handset, slumped motionless in his seat with the same amber dark sclera. The cabin was multiplying. Jenna Okoro reached Chris in the aft galley within a minute. Between them, they laid Emery on the galley floor and tried to stabilize her. Jenna's assessment relayed in clipped phrases through the interphone. Same symptom set. Fever, rapid tissue change. She's losing coherence. We have maybe 10 minutes before she presents like 14C. I relayed to the flight deck. Captain Endicott's voice came back with the first detectable crack in its composure. Andrea, give me the real number. How many affected? Confirmed. 2 restrained or incapacitated. 1 additional symptomatic and declining. Our lead is bitten and progressing. Silence. 4 seconds of open mic with nothing but engine hum and the hiss of the pressurization system. I'm declaring a medical emergency and diverting. Closest suitable field is Billings, Montana. 53 minutes. Copy. Andrea. A pause. First Officer Yoon is going to manage the radios and the approach. I need you to manage the cabin. Whatever you have to do. Use your judgment. Understood, Captain. And Andrea, the cockpit door stays locked. No matter what you hear back there. No matter who asks. That door does not open until we're on the ground, and I open it from this side. Confirm. Confirmed. Door stays locked. I hung up the interphone and turned to face the cabin. 189 conscious passengers were looking at me through the gap in the curtain. Some of them had heard the PA request to Billings approach. Some had heard Endicott's emergency declaration over the cabin speakers, a technical oversight. The PA had been left hot for 3 seconds before someone on the flight deck killed it. The word emergency had gone out into the cabin like a flare. Priya appeared at my shoulder. What do you need? Divide the cabin. Curtain at row 18. Everything forward of 18 is our clean zone. Everyone who was near rows 14 and 22 needs to be moved aft of the curtain. You're quarantining the back of the plane. I'm separating what I can separate. She didn't argue. She went to work. The swim team coach, her name was Diane Muller, and she became the most important civilian on that aircraft, understood immediately, and began moving her athletes forward of the curtain in pairs, checking each one's face and eyes as they passed. The precision of it caught me. She was already screening before I'd asked anyone to screen. I pulled her aside at the curtain line. Coach Muller. Diane. Diane, how many of your team sat within 2 rows of the man in 22D? She closed her eyes and ran a mental seating chart. 4. Emery, who's already down. Taylor Voss, seat 24C. Marcus Reed, 23B. Ania Jackson, 22F, same row as Boyd. Where are they now? Taylor's in row 9, Marcus is in 11. Ania. She looked toward the aft curtain. Ania went to use the restroom about 15 minutes ago. I haven't seen her come back. I picked up the interphone. Chris, do you have a female passenger, late teens, swim team jacket, back there with you? Static. Then, she's in the last row. She won't look at me. The curtain at row 18 became the border of a country that existed for 47 minutes. Forward of it, 141 passengers, Priya, Dr. Foss, and me. The lights were dimmed, but the overhead readers were on in clusters where people needed to see each other's faces. The mood was taut, watchful, and cooperative in the particular way that human beings cooperate when they can see the alternative through a thin fabric wall. Aft of it, 48 passengers, Chris, Jenna Okoro, and a situation that was deteriorating by the minute. Gerald Harkin was still restrained in 14C, but had begun making a sound, a low, continuous moan that carried through the curtain and could not be muted, muffled, or ignored. Terrence Boyd in 22D had progressed to full seizure and then to the same rigid, clicking immobility. Emery Salk was unconscious on the aft galley floor, with Jenna monitoring her vitals. And Ania Jackson in the last row had begun bleeding from her gums and would not respond to her name. Chris, on the interphone. Andrea, I have 48 people back here, and 3 of them are turning. The ones who aren't turning can see the ones who are. I don't have enough restraints. I don't have enough hands. I need help. I looked at the curtain. The fabric swayed gently with the pressurization airflow, a domestic motion, like a bedroom drape. On the other side of it was my colleague, asking for support. On this side were 141 people who were clean, whose survival depended on that curtain remaining a meaningful boundary. Chris, I can't send anyone back. I need you to do something for me. What? Move the unaffected passengers forward of the curtain. Screen them at the line. Anyone with fever, nosebleed, or altered behavior stays aft. You want me to sort them? I want you to move the healthy ones to safety and keep the rest contained. Silence. Then, okay, give me 5 minutes. The passenger transfer took 12. Chris walked each person forward individually, and Diane Muller screened them at the curtain gap, a hand on the forehead, a look at the eyes, a question only a coherent person could process. Tell me your seat number and who was sitting beside you. If the answer was clear and the temperature was normal and the eyes were clean, they came through. 39 of the 48 passed. 9 stayed behind the curtain. 5 of those 9 were symptomatic. 4 were not yet symptomatic, but had been in direct physical contact with someone who was a shared armrest, a past item, a touch in the aisle during the first confrontation. They stayed because Jenna Okoro, who had commandeered the aft section with a steady voice and a roll of medical tape, told them the truth. I don't know if you're infected. I don't know the transmission vector. If you come forward and you are carrying this, you will spread it to everyone who is currently safe. If you stay here with me, you might be fine in an hour and walk through that curtain clean. They stayed. 4 strangers who chose confinement on incomplete information because a young woman in a wrinkled residency fleece told them it was the right thing to do. Margot was deteriorating. She'd moved herself to the forward galley, my suggestion, her legs, and was sitting on the floor between the coffee makers with her back against the bulkhead. The discoloration had passed her elbow and was climbing the bicep, visible at the sleeve line. Her temperature, measured by Jenna's forehead strip before the partition, was 104.1. She was still cogent, but her speech had slowed, as if each word required a decision about whether it was worth the energy. Andrea. I crouched beside her. The captains divert to Billings. 53 minutes, he said. That was 20 minutes ago. 33 now. I won't make 33. You don't know that. I counted the progression on Harkin. Onset to full turn was about 20 minutes. I was bitten at 12:46. It's 1:22. I'm on borrowed time that I'm spending on math because math is the last thing to go. I held her hand. It was burning. At 1:29 a.m., Margot Telford asked me to restrain her to the jump seat. She asked clearly, with no emotion in her voice that I could detect, using the same procedural tone she'd used every time she'd given me an instruction across 3 years of flying together. She asked me to use the extension seat belts, to secure her wrists to the seat frame behind her back, and to cinch the lap belt tight enough that she could not lean forward more than 6 inches. I did it. I tightened every strap. I checked every buckle. And when I finished, she looked at me and said, "If this reaches my chest before Billings, I need you to put the alcohol cloth over my face and hold it. You understand?" The fumes slowed Harkin for a few seconds. That might be all you get, but it's something. Margot, I'm giving you a tool, not a eulogy. Take it. I took a lavatory cloth from the galley, soaked it in isopropyl from the medical kit, sealed it in a plastic bag, and put it in my apron pocket. Then I went back to work, because work was the only available alternative to the thing I was feeling. And the thing I was feeling could not help anyone on that aircraft. The cabin forward of the curtain had reorganized itself into a kind of spontaneous cooperative. Diane Muller had become the de facto civilian leader. She'd stationed her swimmers, 17 athletes in peak physical condition at intervals along the aisle, not as guards, but as visible, calm presences who made the frightened passengers around them feel bracketed by capable bodies. Dr. Foss was conducting quiet assessments, moving row to row, checking pulses and pupils, and asking gentle questions designed to surface early cognitive changes. A man in row 7, a software engineer named Paul Atchison, who'd spent the first hour silent and rigid in his seat, had begun organizing the overhead bin contents into categories. Items that could block, items that could bind, items that could brace a door. He worked without speaking, with the focused efficiency of a person who had found the one task that kept the fear from consuming him. I let him work. Everyone needed a task. Tasks were architecture, and architecture was sanity. Priya was managing the forward lavatory access one person at a time. Door stays open a crack. 30-second limit. She'd improvise the system without being asked. When I passed her at the forward bulkhead, she murmured, "I called my husband on the airphone in business class. The line connected, but all I got was a recording. A federal recording. It said all non-essential domestic communications are temporarily suspended. I stopped walking. When? Just now. I tried twice. I went to the business class airphone. I picked it up. The same recording played a synthesized female voice. Government cadence, no agency identified. All non-essential domestic telecommunications are temporarily suspended under federal continuity protocols. This message will repeat. I hung up and picked up the flight deck interphone. Captain. Endicott answered immediately. Go ahead. Are you in contact with Billings Approach? We were. We lost them 8 minutes ago. Salt Lake Center is still up. They've confirmed our divert and cleared us direct, but Billings Tower isn't responding. The airphone is returning a federal suspension recording. A pause, longer this time. Yeah, Dana's been monitoring guard frequency. There's a lot of traffic. Military traffic. Some of it is in the clear. Andrea, I don't think this is just our plane. The sentence landed in my chest like a stone dropped into deep water. I'd been operating inside the frame of a single medical event on a single aircraft, an emergency. Yes, an unprecedented one. But bounded, containable. Something that would end on a runway with paramedics and floodlights and people in hazmat suits who understood what we were dealing with. If this wasn't just our plane, there would be no paramedics. There would be no one waiting at the bottom of the approach to take this from us. What's our fuel state? I asked. 3 hours and 12 minutes to dry tanks. Then we have options. We have options. At 1:38 a.m. Central, behind the curtain, Emery Salk turned. Chris's voice on the interphone was stripped of everything but data. She's up. She broke the tape. Jenna's holding the galley door. I need the crash axe. Chris, do not open the crash axe panel. She's going to get through the door. Hold the door. Do not arm yourself. I could hear it through the interphone, the banging, rhythmic and heavy. The sound of a body being thrown against the galley door from inside. Then a second sound underneath it. The same low moan that Harkin was producing in 14C. 2 frequencies now. A chord of something that was not grief and not rage, but the sound a human vocal cord makes when nothing is left above the brain stem to modulate it. Jenna's voice muffled. I have a fire extinguisher. If she gets through, I'll hit her in the face. CO2 might give us the same effect as the alcohol's sensory overload. Do it. Chris, how are the 9? 2 more are showing. Nosebleeds. The other 2 contacts are holding. 7 people behind that curtain were still fully human and trapped with the math of what they might become. I could hear one of them, a man, middle-aged, his voice cracking, asking Jenna whether he was going to die. Priya touched my arm. Andrea. Forward cabin. Something's wrong. I turned. In row 4, business class, a man in a gray suit was convulsing in his seat. No bite, no proximity to any known infected. He'd been forward of the curtain since the beginning, 12 rows from the nearest confirmed case, and his hands were clawing the leather armrests, and his jaw was beginning the cycle. Clean zone breach. The quarantine assumption, contact, proximity, the neat epidemiological line I'd drawn at row 18 was wrong, or incomplete, or irrelevant. Dr. Foss reached him first. He took one look, stepped back, and said to me, very quietly, "It's airborne, or it was always airborne. The partition doesn't matter." Diane Muller heard him. She was 3 rows away. Her face didn't change, but I watched her hands close into fists at her sides and then deliberately open again. What do we do? I didn't have an answer. For the first time since 12:44 a.m., I didn't have a next step. The curtain was meaningless. The screening was theater. Every person on this aircraft was breathing the same recirculated air through the same pressurization system. And if the pathogen was suspended in that air, then we were all already exposed. The man in row 4 completed his seizure and went still. Priya and Dr. Foss restrained him with the last set of flex cuffs. I picked up the interphone. "Captain, I heard. The passenger channel was open. The quarantine is broken. It's in the air system. Everyone on board has been breathing it since before we knew." "I heard that too. What are our options?" First Officer Dana Yoon's voice came on the line for the first time. She spoke precisely, with a kind of clarity that comes from having already done the math. If the pathogen is airborne and we're all exposed, then the relevant variable is no longer who's infected. It's who turns and when. Some people turned in 20 minutes. Others have been breathing the same air for an hour and are asymptomatic. There's a differential, individual response. What does that give us? Time. Some of us have more than others, but everyone has some. I looked at the cabin. 170-some people, most still seated, most still watching me. A child in row 16 was drawing on the back of a safety card with a crayon. An elderly couple in row 8 was holding hands across the armrest. Paul Atchison in row 7 had stopped organizing the bins and was sitting very still, staring at his own hands as if checking them for tremors. "Then we use the time," I said. "Agreed," said Yoon. "Andrea, I need to tell you something. The military traffic on guard frequencies, some of it is about us. About Flight 781. About all of us. Every aircraft in the National Airspace System. They're grounding everything. Every airport is closing." "Billings? Billings closed 12 minutes ago." I'm going to tell you what that sentence did to the air inside my lungs, because I think it matters. There's a moment in emergency response when the frame breaks. Not the situation has been broken from the start. The frame. The assumed container around the crisis that lets you function inside it. For me, the frame was the runway. Everything I'd done since 1244 had been structured by the promise of a runway, a concrete surface where the problem ended and someone else's expertise began. The restraints, the partition, the screening, the rationing of calm, all of it, was bridge building toward that surface. Dana Yoon took the surface away. "What about military fields?" I asked. "Malmstrom, Mountain Home." Guard traffic suggests they're active operations only. No civilian approaches authorized. Then what's available to us? Captain Endicott came back on. His voice was older than it had been an hour ago. "We've been looking at the chart. There's a decommissioned strip near the Idaho-Montana border. Former Forest Service tanker base. Runway 6,200 feet, paved, no services. It's been closed since 2019, but the pavement should still be there." Should. There's no tower, no lights, no approach procedure. We'd have to find it visually and put her down in the dark. Can you do that? I've landed on worse in the Navy. Dana, what's our fuel if we go there? Yoon, we'd arrive with roughly 90 minutes of reserve. Enough for one attempt and a go-around. That's our play then. Captain, I said, when we land, what do? There's no ground support, no ambulances, no perimeter. We open the doors, and we're on a disused runway in rural Montana with nearly 200 people and an unknown number who will turn. I know. I need more than I know, Captain. A long breath through the mic. Andrea, I've been flying for 31 years. I've handled decompressions, engine failures, a cracked windscreen over the Atlantic in a hailstorm. Every one of those emergencies had a procedure, a checklist. This doesn't. So I'm going to land this airplane because that's what I can do. And what happens after the wheels stop is going to be on you and everyone back there who's still standing. I'm sorry. That's where we are. He wasn't wrong. He wasn't being unkind. He was a pilot doing the one thing pilots are built to do: put the aircraft on a surface. And everything beyond that was outside his jurisdiction. The cockpit door was locked, and it was locked for a reason. And behind it were two people whose entire contribution to our survival was the act of flying, and the discipline to keep flying. That contribution was not small. It was in that moment everything. But it stopped at the threshold. I went back to the cabin. Margot was worse. Her breathing had become the shallow, rapid pattern I'd seen in Harkin just before he turned the precursor rhythm. Jenna called it over the interphone. A panting that wasn't about oxygen, but about the nervous system reorganizing itself. The body rehearsing its next state. The discoloration had climbed past her shoulder. Her eyes were still brown, still hers, but the focus came and went like a radio signal on the edge of range. I knelt beside her. Billings is closed. Every airport is closed. There's a decommissioned strip. We're going there. Good. Margot, I need the cabin plan. You've been running this crew for 9 years. When we're on the ground, what do I do? She was quiet for a long time. Then she said slowly, as if pulling each word up from a well. Forward door. Slide deploys. Get the healthy off first. Leave the turned restrained. Lock the aircraft behind you. The fuselage is the strongest container you have. Use it as your quarantine. Leave people locked in the plane? Leave what used to be people locked in the plane. The ones who are still people, get them off and get them walking. Find a building, any building, walls and a door. Her hand tightened on mine, then relaxed. Andrea, I'm here. You're the crew now. The descent into the mountain dark was the loneliest 20 minutes of my life. Captain Endicott began the approach at 1:51 a.m. Central Time. There was no approach plate, no electronic guidance, no tower to call. He flew by the instruments to get the altitude down, and by the topographic chart on Dana Yoon's tablet to find the valley. The passengers felt the engines change pitch and the nose drop, and the cabin, which had been held in a kind of paralyzed stillness for the last 15 minutes, began to stir. I made the PA. I will never forget the exact words because I rehearsed them in my head for 60 seconds before I picked up the handset. And I rehearsed them because I knew that they would be the last thing many of these people heard from anyone in authority. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Andrea. We're beginning our descent to a landing site in Montana. When we stop, I'll open the forward door. An evacuation slide will deploy. You will exit the aircraft quickly and calmly. Forward rows first. Leave everything. Do not go to the overhead bins. Do not stop for any reason. When you reach the ground, move away from the aircraft and stay together. I will be on the ground with you. I paused. The hum of the engines filled the space. I know you're scared. I am too. But this crew has not stopped working for you since this started, and we are not going to stop now. Do what we ask. Move when we say. Stay together. I hung up. Diane Muller was already organizing her swimmers into an exit assistance chain, 2 athletes at the slide base to catch passengers, 2 more 20 feet out to direct foot traffic. Dr. Foss had packed a go kit from the medical supplies. Bandages, the remaining alcohol, a bottle of ibuprofen, a pen light. Paul Atchison had distributed the overhead bin items. He'd categorized a heavy laptop as a blunt instrument, extension cords as binding material, a metal water bottle as a wedge. These people had organized themselves. I want that on the record. I didn't build a system. They built it and handed it to me and said, "Tell us what to do next." The hierarchy was mine, only because I wore the uniform, and they needed someone wearing it. Behind the curtain, the situation had collapsed. Jenna Okoro's last interphone report at 1:44 a.m. was delivered in a whisper. 3 fully turned back here. I've sealed the aft galley. Chris and I have 4 unturned passengers between us, and we're in the last row. We can hear them in the aisle. If you can get us forward before touchdown, do it now. I opened the curtain. The mid-cabin between rows 15 and 28 was a corridor I will not describe in detail because the people in it were passengers whose families may hear this. And what had happened to them did not erase who they had been. I'll say that 3 figures were in the aisle, upright, mobile, moving with the same unmodulated purpose I'd seen in Harkin, and they were between me and the aft section. I used the beverage cart. I unbraked it, shoved it down the aisle at a run, and the impact drove them backward 3 rows. It bought 6 seconds. Chris came through the curtain gap carrying a woman over his shoulder. Jenna followed with 2 passengers ahead of her and 1 behind. The 4th unturned passenger, a college boy, whose face was white as printer paper, was the last through. Chris pulled the curtain closed and braced the second galley cart against it as a barricade. We were all forward now. Every living, cognizant person on Flight 781 was between rows 1 and 14. Behind us, restrained and unrestrained, the turned occupied the back 2/3 of the aircraft, like tenants who had inherited the space by force of biology. The wheels came down with a mechanical thud. The flaps extended. The nose dropped further. Endicott's voice on the PA, calm as a lake. Brace for landing. We braced. The runway was dark, and the touchdown was hard. Endicott put the aircraft down at approximately 2:07 a.m. The main gear hit first, bounced, hit again, and held. The thrust reversers roared. The deceleration threw unsecured items forward in a cascade of bags, shoes, water bottles, and one of Paul Atchison's organized bins. The aircraft shuddered along the uneven pavement, veered slightly left, corrected, and came to a stop with a groan of metal and the slow dying whine of engines spooling down. Silence. Not the mechanical silence of a parked aircraft on a jet bridge. That silence has context, has the promise of a terminal beyond the door. This was the silence of an object, stopped in the middle of nowhere at 2 a.m, with mountains it couldn't see on 3 sides and nothing human for miles in any direction. I was at the forward door before the aircraft finished rocking. I disarmed the slide, then rearmed it, a habit so deep it overrode conscious thought, then pulled the handle. The door swung open, and the slide inflated with a sharp pneumatic bang that echoed off the surrounding terrain. Cold air poured in. October mountain air, maybe 35 degrees, carrying pine resin and dust and the mineral smell of old concrete. Forward rows, go. Leave everything. Go. They went. Diane's swimmers were first down the slide, and they positioned themselves at the base exactly as planned. Then the passengers, family by family, row by row, some jumping, some sliding, some tumbling. Dr. Foss helped the elderly couple from row 8 onto the slide and went down after them. Paul Atchison went last from his row, carrying nothing but the metal water bottle. I counted every person off that aircraft the way Margot had taught me on my first flight. Not by number, but by face. Each face was a completion. Each face that came through the door was a person I had kept alive from Dallas to this strip of abandoned pavement. Chris went down the slide and took a position at the base. Jenna went next. Priya was beside me, managing the flow, her voice steady, her hands guiding shoulders. 151 people came through that door. I counted them all. 151 out of 193 who had boarded in Dallas. The 42 who did not come through the door were behind the galley cart barricade, and they were no longer passengers. They were a sound, a collective, modulated groan that vibrated through the fuselage floor and pulsed against the barricade in waves. Priya went down the slide. I was alone in the forward galley. I turned to look at Margot. She was still in the jump seat. The restraints were holding. Her head was down, chin to chest, and the sound coming from her was not the moan. It was breathing. Ragged, shallow, impossibly fast, but breathing. Her hands were clenched into fists against the belts. Her knuckles were white. Margot. She lifted her head. Her eyes were still brown, darker than they'd been, the amber pressing in at the edges. But the center still held. She was still in there. Go, she said. The word cost her visible effort. I can carry you down the slide. No. Her jaw tightened. If I turn on the slide, I'll land in the middle of them. Everyone you just saved. No. Margot, walk away. Close the door. That's an order from your lead. I stood in the doorway of that aircraft with the cold rushing in, and 151 people on the ground behind me and my lead flight attendant restrained to a jump seat, burning alive from the inside, giving me her last professional instruction. I closed the door. The latch sealed with the same sound it makes at every gate, at every departure, a sound I'd heard 10,000 times. It had never meant anything before. A mechanical function, a step in a checklist. I went down the slide. My feet hit gravel and I didn't stop moving. The Forest Service Station was a quarter-mile east of the runway threshold. I didn't know it was there. Nobody did. Dana Yoon spotted it during the approach, a roofline visible for 2 seconds in the landing lights, and relayed the bearing to Chris via the cabin PA, while the passengers were still on the slide. By the time I reached the ground, the lead group was already walking toward it. Diane Muller at the front with a pen light and 2 swimmers flanking her. It was a cinder block operations building. Single-story, flat roof, steel doors front and back. Windows with exterior mesh screens. Closed since 2019, but intact. The front door had a padlock. Paul Atchison broke it with the metal water bottle in 3 strikes, the aluminum denting and deforming in his hand, and the door swung inward to reveal a dark, cold space that smelled of mouse droppings and old diesel. We had walls. We had a door. Margot's last instruction to me, delivered hours ago from the forward galley floor, had been exactly this. Find a building. Any building. Walls and a door. I stood at the threshold and counted them in, face by face. The elderly couple, moving slowly, his arm around her waist. The family with the toddler. The child, now awake and silent, with the particular gravity of a 3-year-old who has absorbed the mood of every adult around her. The swim team. Filing in with a discipline that would have made their coaches at any level proud. The solo travelers, the consultants, the strangers who had become a population. 151 people entered that building. I was the last inside. Chris closed the door and braced it with a filing cabinet. The interior was 4 rooms. A main operations bay with desks and a dead radio console, 2 small offices, and a utility room with a working well pump that someone had left connected to a generator. Jenna found a first aid cabinet that was stocked with supplies dated 2017. Dr. Foss found a wall-mounted landline phone that returned a dial tone, a landline, hardwired, still fed by a copper pair that had survived whatever was happening to the cellular and digital networks. He picked up the phone and dialed 911. It rang 6 times and connected to a state emergency dispatcher in Helena. The voice on the other end was exhausted and procedural. Doctor. Foss identified himself, gave our location, gave the count, gave the medical summary. The dispatcher asked him to repeat the part about passengers who had changed. He repeated it. She was quiet for a moment, then said, "You're the 4th aircraft I've logged tonight." I took the phone from him. "This is Andrea Simek, flight attendant, United 781. We have 151 civilians in a Forest Service building adjacent to a decommissioned tanker runway. We have injured. We have exposed individuals who may still convert. We need medical evacuation. Ma'am, I'm going to give you a reference number and a frequency. There is a National Guard unit staging at a high school gymnasium in Thompson Falls, 62 miles southwest of your likely position. They're running ground convoys at first light. I cannot promise a timeline. First light is 5 hours from now." "Yes, ma'am. What do I do for 5 hours with 151 people? Keep them together. Keep them calm. Keep the building sealed. Check everyone every 30 minutes for symptoms. Isolate anyone who presents. That's the guidance we're giving." She gave me the reference number. She gave me the frequency. She said, "I'm sorry, this is what I have." I believed her. I hung up the phone and turned to face the room. 151 faces looked at me. Some were sitting on the floor, some leaning against walls, some standing with their arms wrapped around themselves against the cold. The toddler was asleep in her mother's lap. Diane swimmers were seated in rows along the back wall, silent, watchful. I told them the truth. A convoy at dawn. 5 hours, 30-minute checks. Stay together. Then I assigned the watches. The first conversion inside the building happened at 3:15 a.m. A man named David Paretsky, row 11. No known contact with any infected passenger, no bite, no proximity event. He'd walked a quarter mile in the cold, entered the building on his own feet, sat against the east wall, and closed his eyes. An hour later, his breathing changed, and a swimmer named Marcus Reed, stationed on the watch I'd set, saw the jaw begin to cycle. We moved him to the smaller office. Chris and Paul Atchison carried him. Jenna assessed him through the door. Same progression, same speed, same destination. The room heard the sound through the wall, the clicking, the moan, and the room contracted. Not physically, emotionally. The distance between people shrank. Strangers pressed closer to strangers. The elderly woman from row 8 put her arm around a college girl she'd never met. The toddler's father held his daughter tighter and stared at the ceiling. I checked every person in that building. I walked row by row, face by face, the way I'd walk the aisle on a quiet red eye. And I looked at each one. I checked their foreheads with the back of my hand. I looked at their eyes. I asked them to tell me their name and where they'd been sitting. The coherent answered. The scared answered with shaking voices. Nobody refused. 4 more people converted before dawn. I'm not going to give you their names because their families asked me not to. And I'll honor that until the day I die. I'll tell you that each one was moved to the office. I'll tell you that Jenna stayed at that door for 5 hours and never left it. I'll tell you that Chris braced the door with his own body twice when the impacts from inside threatened the hinges. And he did it without being asked, without hesitating, and without complaint. And I'll tell you about the flight deck. At 4:40 a.m., the operations bay radio, dead since we'd arrived, crackled to life on a frequency I hadn't touched. Captain Endicott's voice came through, thin and distorted, transmitted from the aircraft's VHF radio a quarter-mile away. "Andrea, this is Russ." I picked up the handset. "Captain, I want you to know that Dana and I are still in the flight deck. The door is locked. We can hear them in the cabin. We're not going to open it. Are you okay? Either of you?" A pause. "Dana's running a fever. She's been running one for about 20 minutes. She told me 10 minutes ago." I closed my eyes. "She's going to restrain herself to the first officer's seat. She's doing it now. I'll confirm the restraints are solid. Captain, I'm going to keep this frequency open. If the convoy contacts you on guard, relay them to me and I'll talk them in from here. I can see the runway from the flight deck windows. I can guide the vehicles. You're going to stay in that cockpit. This is my aircraft. I don't leave my aircraft." Behind his voice, I could hear the muffled percussion of bodies against the cockpit door. The turned passengers, drawn by the sound of his transmission, were congregating in the forward galley where I'd stood 3 hours earlier. The door that Endicott had locked at 12:50 a.m. was holding, just as he'd certified it would. It was designed to resist forced entry. It was performing its function. "Russ, yeah, thank you for getting us down. You got yourselves out, Andrea. I put the plane on the ground. You emptied it. There's a difference." The convoy arrived at 7:12 a.m. Mountain Time. 16 vehicles, National Guard and County Emergency Services from 3 jurisdictions. Captain Endicott guided them from the flight deck by radio, his voice steady and precise, calling out runway markings and taxiway bearings as if he were directing a routine pushback. I stood at the door of the Forest Service building and counted everyone out, face by face. The same 146 ambulatory survivors who'd made it through the night. 5 were in the sealed office. They were not counted among the living. They were counted separately on a list I kept in my apron pocket, in the same handwriting I'd used for drink orders 6 hours earlier. They promoted me. I didn't want it, and I told them so. But that's not how the system works. The system needs a story with a name attached to it. And my name was on every passenger's account, so it became the name. "Flight attendant saves 146. That's the headline they wrote. It is not the story I lived. The story I lived is that I closed a door on a woman who was still conscious and still giving orders, and who died restrained to a jump seat she'd sat in 1,000 times. The story I lived is that a man in a cockpit stayed at his station guiding trucks down a runway while his first officer turned in the seat beside him. The story I lived is that a young resident held a door for 5 hours, and a swim coach organized an evacuation she'd never trained for, and a software engineer broke a padlock with a water bottle. And none of them were crew. None of them were paid to be there. I'm not the one who saved anyone. I'm the one who was still standing in the aisle when the aisle was all there was. That's not heroism. That's just not leaving. I haven't flown since.